My father stole the inheritance Grandpa left me. How I took it back and turned it into $1 million business will shock you. I'm Zach, 34, and I've somehow become that office hamster everyone warns college kids about in downtown Minneapolis. You know the type, hunched over spreadsheets all day, surviving on vending machine coffee that tastes like it was filtered through a sweaty sock. My business card says financial manager at Harper Construction, but my brother Tom just calls me Junior, despite the fact that I own 25% of the company's shares. Not that it matters much when Dad and Tom make all the real decisions. Every morning, I drag myself through the same routine. My alarm screams at 6:30. I shower while still half asleep, choke down some toast, and drive to our downtown office where I'll spend the next 9 hours trapped in fluorescent purgatory. My cubicle walls are this depressing shade of gray that somehow matches the color my soul has become after 7 years of pushing papers around. The worst part? It's a family business. So I can't even complain about my boss without it becoming Thanksgiving dinner conversation. Dad started Harper Construction 30 years ago, and Tom joined right after college. I was supposed to go to art school, but Dad had that look in his eyes when he talked about the Harper men building America together. So here I am, the guy who makes sure subcontractors get paid on time while my dreams collect dust in the corner. Don't get me wrong, we're successful. Harper Construction has built half the strip malls in 3 counties. We're currently working on our biggest project yet, a luxury condo complex that'll make the company millions. Tom walks around the office like he's Donald Trump minus the weird hair, slapping backs and talking about market penetration and vertical integration like they're magical incantations that'll summon the prophet gods. Fridays are the worst. Everyone buzzing about weekend plans, while I nod along pretending I care about Tom's golf handicap or Dad's fishing trip with his country club buddies. The truth is, I'm just counting down hours until I can escape to the only place that still feels real to me. Grandpa's farm by Memory Lake. Every weekend, I drive 2 hours northwest of Minneapolis into rural Wisconsin, watching the concrete jungle fade in my rear-view mirror. I take I-35 until it becomes smaller state highways. Billboards give way to cornfields, and something inside me starts to wake up. By the time I hit the gravel road, leading to Grandpa's place near Spooner, Wisconsin, I feel more alive than I have all week. The farm isn't much by Minneapolis standards, just an old farmhouse with a wraparound porch, a barn that leans slightly to the left, and about 40 acres of the most beautiful land you've ever seen. Half is woodlands with massive white pines typical of northern Wisconsin, some standing since before the Civil War. The other half slopes down to Memory Lake, a perfect blue jewel nestled in the green, one of Wisconsin's thousands of glacial lakes that make this part of the Midwest a hidden paradise. Grandpa bought this place in 1972 with his savings from 20 years at the steel mill. Back then, you could still afford a slice of heaven on a working man's salary. He and Grandma fixed up the old farmhouse room by room, planted an apple orchard, and spent every summer teaching me what matters in life. While my friends were parked in front of Nintendo systems, I was learning to bait a hook, identify bird calls, or change the oil in Grandpa's ancient Ford pickup. That truck was so old it predated seatbelts, but Grandpa swore it had character, which I later realized was his word for rusted floorboards and mysterious engine sounds. My childhood memories are all here, catching my first base at sunrise while fog hung over the water, pedaling my bike down dirt trails with playing cards close into the spokes to make that satisfying rumble sound. Evenings on the porch with Grandma's homemade lemonade, so tart it made your eyes water, while Johnny Cash or Merle Haggard played on Grandpa's vinyl record player. This ain't just land, Zach. Grandpa would tell me, his voice rough as oak bark. This is our soul's resting place. Then he'd wink at Grandma like they shared the world's best secret. After Grandma passed 5 years ago, something changed in Grandpa. His laugh didn't come as easy, and I'd catch him staring at her empty rocking chair beside his. But he never talked about selling. This place was their dream, their legacy. These days, I'm the one who changes the oil in the truck and patches the roof when it leaks. Grandpa's hands shake too much now, though he'd never admit it. He sits on the porch with his black coffee, telling stories about the lake's mysteries or the time he caught a bay so big it pulled the boat halfway to Canada. I pretend to believe him, just like he pretended to believe me when I was 10 and swore I saw a Bigfoot in the backwoods. Some lies are just another form of love. Sometimes I think about quitting Harper Construction, moving out here permanently. I could fix up the old boathouse, maybe offer fishing tours in summer. Live simply. But then I remember my mortgage, car payments, and the golden handcuffs of that 25% ownership. Life has a way of building fences around dreams until they become something you visit rather than something you live. As Thoreau said, the price of anything is the amount of life you exchange for it. Sitting by Memory Lake at sunset, watching base jump for mayflies, I wonder what price I'm really paying by staying at Harper Construction. Sometimes a dream isn't what you want. It's what you can't live without. Last Friday was particularly hellish. We lost a bid on a major project, and Tom spent the afternoon blaming everyone but himself. I heard him through the wall, ripping into our project manager until the poor guy looked ready to jump out the window. Later, Tom stopped by my office, leaning against my doorframe like nothing happened. Heading to Grandpa's again? Man, I don't know how you can spend weekends in that dusty old place. No decent Wi-Fi, no nightlife, nothing. I just shrugged. Some people fish for compliments. I just like fishing. Tom rolled his eyes. Whatever floats your boat, little brother. Hey, Dad wants to see you before you leave. Dad's office is what I imagine the Oval Office would look like if it were designed by someone whose only personality trait is successful businessman. Everything matches. Everything's expensive. And there's not a single item that reveals anything personal about the man behind the desk. Zach, he nodded when I walked in. Sit down. My father speaks almost exclusively in commands. Even his questions sound like orders. I sat. How's your grandfather doing? This was unusual. Dad rarely mentions Grandpa, his own father. There's a history there I've never fully understood. Something about Dad choosing business over the family farm. Grandpa disapproving of his concrete castles. They're civil at holidays. But that's about it. He's okay. Cough's getting worse. But he won't see a doctor. Dad nodded, tapping his Mont Blanc pen against his desk. Stubborn old man. Listen, I'm heading out there tomorrow. Need to discuss some things with him. My stomach tightened. Dad going voluntarily to the farm? This wasn't normal. What kind of things? Family business. He waved dismissively. Nothing for you to worry about. You can skip going out there this weekend. Now, I definitely wasn't skipping my visit. Something was happening, and whenever Dad says nothing to worry about, it usually means the exact opposite. I arrive at the farm later, that evening, to find Grandpa on the porch, wrapped in his old Korean War blanket, despite the warm May air. His cough sounded worse than last weekend. Brought you some of that cherry pie from the diner, I said, setting the box beside him. Grandpa's eyes lit up. Some things never change. His sweet tooth has been legendary since I was a kid. Back then, Grandma would smack his hand away from cookie dough, saying he'd eat it all raw if she let him. You're a good boy, Zach. He opened the box and took a bite directly from the pie, without bothering with a plate. Another privilege of old age, eating dessert however you damn well please. We sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over the pines. Cicadas started their evening symphony, and somewhere across the lake, a whippoorwill called out. City people pay thousands for meditation apps trying to recreate what we get here for free. Finally, Grandpa set aside the half-eaten pie and cleared his throat. Your father called. The way, he said, it made my skin prickle. Yeah, he mentioned he might come by tomorrow. Grandpa nodded slowly, looking out over the darkening lake. He's bringing some people. Developers. He spat the word like it tasted bad. What do you mean, developers? Grandpa's hands trembled as he pulled his blanket tighter. Your dad's been talking to some big company. Memory Lake Estates. They're calling it. Luxury homes all around the shoreline. My brain struggled to process what he was saying. But this is your land. Your farm. For now. Grandpa coughed, a deep rattling sound that scared me more than his words. When he pulled his handkerchief away, I pretended not to see the spots of red. Your dad thinks I'm being foolish, sitting on prime real estate without developing it. Says at my age, I should cash out, get a nice apartment in town. I couldn't imagine Grandpa in an apartment. He belonged here, among the pines and lake grass, with dirt under his fingernails and fish scales on his clothes. Pulling him from this land would be like uprooting one of those ancient trees. It might survive the transplant, but something essential would be lost. You're not selling, right? I tried to keep my voice casual, but panic was rising in my chest. Grandpa looked at me, his blue eyes suddenly clear and fierce despite his weakened state. This land is our soul, Zach. If it goes, we lose ourselves. A tear slid down his weathered cheek. But your father's pushing hard. Says the developers will give millions to pave paradise and put up those cookie-cutter mansions. I'd never seen Grandpa cry before, not even at Grandma's funeral. Something cold and hard formed in my stomach. I won't let that happen, I promised, though I had no idea how I'd stop it. That night, I couldn't sleep. Rain pattered against the old farmhouse roof, and thunder rumbled in the distance. I thought about all the storms this house had weathered, literal and figurative. Would it survive this one? I thought about the lake, how it looked different every time I saw it, but somehow remained the same. How Grandpa taught me to respect it, saying water has memory longer than any human. What would happen when those memories were replaced by motorboats and jet skis? When the fish were driven to deeper waters by noise and pollution? Around 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep and went to the kitchen for some water. Through the window, I could see the lake in the moonlight. Even in darkness, it had a presence, a pull. I understood why Grandpa and Grandma had sacrificed everything to build a life here. I was still at the window when I noticed Grandpa had fallen asleep in his chair. Carefully, I helped him to bed, his body feeling lighter than it should for a man who spent his life working the land. After making sure he was comfortable, I decided I'd head back to Minneapolis early in the morning. If Dad was planning something, I needed to know what. The drive back to the city felt heavier than usual. Each mile pulling me away from the lake seemed wrong somehow, like I was abandoning my post. But I needed to be strategic about this. If Dad and Tom were plotting something with developers, the evidence would be at the office. I arrived at Harper Construction just before lunch on Monday, playing it casual with a coffee in hand, and a rehearsed story about needing to pick up files for a project. The receptionist barely looked up as I badged through to the executive floor. As I rounded the corner to Dad's office, I heard voices, Dad's commanding tone, and another I didn't recognize, smoother and clearly practiced in the art of persuasion. Curious and increasingly worried, I slowed my pace, positioning myself just outside Dad's open door. From this angle, they couldn't see me, but I could see them. Dad leaning forward in his executive chair, and across from him, a man in an expensive suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Between them on Dad's mahogany desk were spread what looked like architectural renderings. The marketing potential is enormous, the suit was saying. Exclusive lakefront properties just 2 hours from Minneapolis. Private boat access. Preserved woodland views. These will sell before we even break ground. Dad nodded, smiling that shark smile I'd seen him use to close countless deals. We're talking about a significant profit margin. And the timing couldn't be better with a surge in luxury property demand outside major cities. I edged closer, trying to see the documents without being noticed. Dad shifted slightly, giving me a glimpse of what were clearly development plans with a logo at the top, Memory Lake Development. My stomach dropped. The plan showed the lake surrounded not by trees, but by rows of identical luxury homes. The barn, the apple orchard, even the farmhouse, all gone, replaced by a clubhouse and swimming pool. Our soul paved over for profit. Your father's health isn't good, the developer was saying. You mentioned the property will be coming to you soon? Dad nodded with that shark smile I'd seen him use to close countless deals. My father's will leave everything to me. Been that way for decades. With his condition worsening, we should be able to break ground by next spring. His sentimental attachment to the place has held up progress long enough. The cold calculation in his voice shocked me. He was waiting for Grandpa to die so he could sell off the lake. The developer leaned forward, tapping a manicured finger on the plans. Perfect timing for the market. We'll have model homes ready by next summer, and sales will go through the roof. I backed away silently, my mind racing. As I slipped out of the building and drove home, I made a decision. I wouldn't let this happen. Whatever Dad was planning, I had to warn Grandpa. Standing in my sterile apartment that evening, looking at the Minneapolis skyline through my window, I felt like the lake was calling out to me from miles away. Protect me. Save us. The question wasn't whether I would fight for this place, but what I was willing to sacrifice to save it. I barely slept that night. The Minneapolis skyline glowed outside my window like a neon tombstone, marking the death of something pure. By morning, my eyes burned and my head throbbed, but my resolve was ironclad. I needed to warn Grandpa about Dad's plans before it was too late. Just as I was grabbing my car keys, my phone rang. Grandpa's name flashed on the screen, sending a jolt through me. It was like he'd somehow sensed my thoughts across the miles. Zach. His voice was sandpaper rough, the wet cough punctuating his words. Need you to come out here today. Got to see a lawyer about the farm. My hand tightened around the phone. I was just heading your way. Is everything okay? Not really, he admitted, his typical stoicism cracking. Sheriff Miller stopped by this morning. Said he saw your dad meeting with some big city developers at the Rustic Inn yesterday. They were looking at maps of Memory Lake. Sheriff recognized the place right away. His family's been fishing here since he was a kid. So he knew. Something cold settled in my chest. I'll be there in 2 hours. The drive to Wisconsin felt like the longest of my life. I kept rehearsing what to tell him, how to explain that Dad was circling like a vulture, waiting for him to die so he could cash in on the land. The words tasted bitter, even in my thoughts. I found Grandpa on the porch, dressed in his good flannel shirt and the Wranglers he'd ironed himself. His truck keys dangled from his gnarled fingers. We're going to Hayward, he announced when I stepped out of my car. Got an appointment with Franklin Pierce at 2. Pierce was a kind of small-town attorney who'd probably been practicing since Nixon was in office. Grandpa had mentioned him before. They'd been fishing buddies for decades. Shouldn't we talk first? I suggested, noting how Grandpa's hands trembled as he tried to stand. He shook his head, jaw set in that stubborn line I'd seen 1,000 times before. Talk in the truck. No time to waste. The old Ford pickup smelled like pine air freshener, and the wintergreen tobacco Grandpa had chewed until his doctor made him quit 10 years ago. Some scents just become part of the fabric. As we rattled down the driveway, I noticed Grandpa was breathing harder than usual, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Your father wants to sell the farm, he finally said as we hit the main road. Sheriff showed me some brochure those developers left behind at their table. Fancy houses all around the lake. Clubhouse right where your grandmother's apple trees stand. I nodded slowly. I know. I overheard him at the office yesterday with a developer. Something flashed in Grandpa's eyes. Hurt, maybe, or disappointment. Not in me, but in the son who betrayed him. Your grandmother and I built that place from nothing. Lived in a tent the first summer while we fixed the roof on the house. Every nail, every board, every apple tree has our fingerprints on it. His voice cracked on the last words, and I pretended not to notice the tear he quickly wiped away. The will's wrong, he continued after a moment. Made it years ago when your dad was still working with me on the farm, before he got dollar signs in his eyes. Left everything to him, thinking he'd honor what we built. That's on me. A man should know his own son better. We drove in silence for a few miles, the implications heavy between us. Eventually, I had to ask the question burning in my throat. What are we going to do? Grandpa's weathered face softened into something almost like a smile. We're going to fix it, son. Make a new will. Leave the farm to someone who loves it. Franklin Pierce's law office sat above the Hayward hardware store, accessible by a narrow staircase that Grandpa climbed with stubborn determination despite his labored breathing. The waiting room felt like stepping back in time, with paneling, a secretary typing on an actual typewriter, and fishing trophies lining every available shelf. The secretary, a woman with steel gray hair pinned in a perfect bun, smiled at my grandfather like they were old friends. He's expecting you, Joe. Go right in. Pierce looked exactly like I'd imagined, silver-haired, bow-tie wearing, with reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. He rose from behind a desk cluttered with legal volumes and shook Grandpa's hand warmly. Joe Harper, as I live and breathe. And this must be young Zach I've heard so much about. I shook his hand, surprised by the strength in his grip, despite his age. Let's get down to business, Grandpa said, lowering himself carefully into a leather chair that had probably been there since the Carter administration. Need to change my will. Today. Pierce nodded, unfazed by the urgency. I had a feeling that's what this was about when you called. Martin's been in town, hasn't he? The way he said my father's name told me everything I needed to know about how Pierce felt about him. For the next hour, Pierce and Grandpa talked through the details while I sat quietly, taking it all in, the farm, the lake, the house. Everything would come to me, with the stipulation that the land remained undeveloped for at least 25 years after Grandpa's death. There were tax implications, inheritance considerations, all kinds of legal details that made my head spin. But Pierce walked us through it patiently. This looks pretty bulletproof, Pierce said, reviewing his notes. Martin could contest it, but he'd have a hard time winning if we get this properly executed with witnesses. Grandpa nodded, his face showing relief for the first time that day. Let's do it now. Within an hour, Pierce had drafted the new will, and his secretary had found 2 people from neighboring businesses to serve as witnesses. As they signed their names to the document, I felt a weight lifting. We'd outmaneuvered Dad. The lake was safe. Pierce made copies for us, placing the original in his safe. I'll file this with the county courthouse tomorrow, Joe, he assured us. Your grandson will have everything he needs when... He let the sentence trail off tactfully. Grandpa gripped my shoulder with surprising strength as we left. We did it, Zach. We saved the lake. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe again. On the drive back to the farm, Grandpa seemed lighter too, pointing out landmarks with renewed energy. The creek where he caught his first trout as a boy, the abandoned one-room schoolhouse where he'd met my grandmother at a dance in 1962. We stopped at the Rustic Inn for early dinner, Grandpa insisting I try their famous walleye. Best in Wisconsin, he declared, and I couldn't disagree as I tasted the perfectly crisp fish. We clinked our beer bottles in a silent toast to our victory, and for a perfect moment, all seemed right with the world. Family isn't just blood, Zach, Grandpa said suddenly, his eyes clear and focused on me. It's the people who hold your dreams when you're too tired to carry them yourself. The moment shattered 3 days later when I got the call at work. Grandpa had collapsed in the barn. By the time the ambulance arrived, he was gone. Heart attack, they said. Quick and relatively painless. Cold comfort as I drove back to Wisconsin with tears blurring the road ahead. The farmhouse fell hollow without him, the silence broken only by the ticking of the ancient grandfather clock that counted out the moments of his life. I slept in my childhood bedroom that night, surrounded by fishing trophies and model airplanes, grief pressing down on my chest like a physical weight. The funeral was small, just how Grandpa would have wanted it. His fishing buddies, a few neighbors, some distant cousins I barely knew. Dad and Tom arrived late. Dad's face an unreadable mask as he accepted condolences from people who had no idea of his plans for their beloved lake. Pierce found me after the service, his bow tie slightly askew and his eyes red-rimmed. We'll read the will tomorrow at my office. 2:00. I nodded, grateful for his steadying presence in the chaos. When he walked away, I noticed Dad watching us, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. That night, I sat alone on the dock, watching moonlight ripple across Memory Lake. The air smelled like pine and fresh water, and somewhere in the distance, a loon called out to the darkness. I remembered Grandpa teaching me to mimic that sound when I was 8. How proud I'd been when I finally got it right. I'll protect this place, I whispered to the water. I promise. Pierce's office was stiflingly hot the next afternoon. The ancient ceiling fan did little more than push the warm air around. I sat stiffly in one of the client chairs, trying not to make eye contact with Dad across the room. Tom sat beside him, scrolling through emails on his phone, clearly annoyed at having to attend this waste of time. When the office door opened, I expected to see Pierce with his bow tie and reading glasses. Instead, a stranger walked in, younger, sharper, with a haircut that reminded me of Elvis Presley, and a suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Gregory Crow from Crow and Associates in Minneapolis. I'll be executing Mr. Harper's will today. My stomach dropped. Where's Mr. Pierce? Crow gave me a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. Unfortunately, Mr. Pierce had a sudden health emergency last night. I'm covering his cases while he recovers. This felt wrong. All wrong. Dad didn't look surprised, though. In fact, there was something like satisfaction in the slight curve of his mouth. Crow sat behind Pierce's desk like he owned it, which I suppose he now did. He pulled out a document that looked nothing like the one we'd signed just a week ago. This is the last will and testament of Joseph Edward Harper, dated March 15th, 2018. Crow began. The next 15 minutes passed in a blur. According to this fraudulent will, Grandpa had left everything to my father. The farm, the lake, all of it. There was no mention of development restrictions, no protection for the land, nothing like what we'd put in place with Pierce. That's not right. I interrupted, hard hammering. Grandpa changed his will last week, with Mr. Pierce. Crow looked at me with practiced sympathy that never reached his eyes. I've reviewed all of Mr. Pierce's files thoroughly. There is no other will on record. I looked at Dad, who was watching me with the calm confidence of a man who knows he's won. What did you do? I demanded, my voice shaking. Dad just shrugged. Pierce had a stroke. Unfortunate timing. Unfortunate timing. As if Pierce's sudden health crisis days after we'd signed a new will was just coincidence. As if the disappearance of that will was just bad luck. The calculated cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. Grandpa wanted me to have the farm. He wanted to protect the lake. I insisted, looking from Crow to Dad and back again. Crow folded his hands on the desk, his signet ring catching the light. Without a written document, I'm afraid those wishes have no legal standing. I stood up, fists clenched at my sides. This is fraud. Grandpa signed a new will. There were witnesses. Dad's smile was cold. Where's your proof, Junior? Where's this magical will? Because legally, this is the only one that exists. He tapped the document on the desk. Memory Lake has been in my family for generations. Now it's mine to do with as I see fit. Tom finally looked up from his phone, bored by the proceedings. Can we wrap this up? I got a tea time at 3. The casual dismissal of everything Grandpa had built, everything he'd loved, sent rage coursing through me. I wanted to flip the desk, grab Dad by his designer tie, make him feel even a fraction of the pain burning through me. Instead, I took a deep breath, remembering Grandpa's words. Family isn't just blood. It's the people who hold your dreams. You'll regret this, I said quietly. Dad chuckled. Grow up, Zach. It's just business. If you want the lake so badly, earn it. $400,000, and it's yours. Otherwise, stay out my way. I walked out without another word, my footsteps echoing on the wooden stairs. Outside, the Wisconsin summer sun felt mockingly bright. I got in my car and drove, no destination in mind, just needing to be away from them. I ended up at Memory Lake. The water was still and perfect, reflecting the pines like a mirror. I sat on the dock where Grandpa had taught me to fish, where we talked about stars and history, and what makes a man's life worth something. The betrayal cut deep, not just Dad's, which I should have expected, but the system's. How easily truth could be erased, paperwork lost, justice denied. I'd been naive to think that signing a piece of paper would protect something as valuable as this land. The sun began to set, turning the lake to liquid gold. A fish jumped nearby, sending ripples across the perfect surface. Life continuing, oblivious to human schemes and heartbreak. As darkness fell, I made my way back to the farmhouse. It wouldn't be mine for much longer. Dad would sell, developers would build, and Memory Lake would become another playground for the wealthy. Unless I sat on the porch swing, pushing gently with my foot the way I had as a child. The familiar creak of the chains was like an old friend's voice. Maybe there was another way. Maybe I didn't need a legal document to honor Grandpa's wishes. Maybe I just needed courage, determination, and a willingness to risk everything. In that moment, with crickets singing and stars appearing one by one above the pines, I made a decision. I would find a way to save this place, even if it meant walking away from everything I had built in Minneapolis, even if it meant going up against my own family. The lake seemed to whisper in the darkness, "Don't give up." And I wouldn't. I couldn't. Not when I could still hear Grandpa's voice in every creak of the farmhouse, see a smile in every sunrise over the water. Mark Twain once wrote, 20 years from now, you'll be more disappointed by the things you didn't do than by the ones you did do. I was done playing it safe, done being the good son, the reliable brother, the office hamster. I would fight for Memory Lake, even if it meant burning everything else to the ground. The morning after the will reading, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. My path forward was suddenly obvious, like when fog lifts off a lake at sunrise and you can see all the way to the opposite shore. I knew exactly what I had to do. First stop, Harper Construction headquarters in downtown Minneapolis. I walked through those glass doors for what I already knew would be the last time, nodding to Brenda at reception, who looked startled to see me in jeans and a faded Twins t-shirt instead of my usual button-down and slacks. "Going casual Friday a bit early this week?" she asked, eyebrows raised. I just smiled and headed to my office. It took all of 15 minutes to pack up 7 years of corporate existence into a single cardboard box. Family photos, a few awards, the fishing lure Grandpa had given me when I landed my first bass. Amazing how little evidence there was that I'd spent a third of my waking hours in this beige box. Dad was in a meeting when I dropped my resignation letter on his desk. I didn't stick around to see his reaction. Tom caught me in the elevator lobby, his face flushed with that particular shade of red that only appeared when someone messed with his carefully orchestrated business plans. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he demanded, blocking my path to the exit. "Quitting," I replied simply. "You can't just walk away. You're a partner. You have responsibilities." I shrugged. "Not anymore. I'm selling my shares." His face went from red to pale so fast, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. To who? His voice had dropped to a whisper. Whoever makes the best offer. I stepped around him and pushed through the revolving door into the spring sunshine, leaving Tom sputtering behind me. My next stop was Davidson and Associates, our biggest competitor in the Minneapolis commercial construction market. They'd been trying to poach me for years, and while I had no interest in working for them, I knew they'd jump at the chance to own 25% of Harper Construction. 3 hours and 4 meetings later, I walked out with a cashier's check that made my hand shake slightly as I folded it into my wallet. Dad had always undervalued my contribution to the company. Davidson hadn't. The irony wasn't lost on me. My realtor nearly dropped her phone when I told her to list my downtown condo immediately at 15% below market value for a quick sale. It worked. 48 hours later, I signed the papers in her office, handing over the keys to a tech executive relocating from Seattle who was thrilled with the bargain. With the combined proceeds from my shares and condo, I had just over $1.2 million in my account, more than enough to buy the farm from Dad, with plenty left over for whatever came next. I called him from the bank parking lot. "It's done. I've got the money. For $100,000 for the farm, just like you said." The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected. "You're serious," he finally said. "Not a question. Dead serious. I'll have my lawyer draw up the paperwork." Another long pause. "It's too late. I already signed with Sunrise Development yesterday. They're breaking ground next month." The world tilted sideways. I'd been so focused on getting the money together, so confident Dad would take it, that I hadn't considered he might already have closed a deal. I'd underestimated how quickly he'd moved to erase Grandpa's legacy. "You said I could buy it if I had the money," I reminded him, struggling to keep my voice level. "And you said I'd regret this," he shot back. "Sounds like we both say things we don't mean. Welcome to the real world, son." The line went dead. I sat in my car, knuckles white around the steering wheel, the bank branch closing around me as employees headed home for the day. I'd burned my bridges, liquidated everything, and it still wasn't enough. That night, in a cheap motel room off I-35, I stared at the ceiling and wondered if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. No job, no home, no family to speak of, just a bank account full of money and a heart full of determination. Was it enough? A quote from Teddy Roosevelt came to mind, something Grandpa used to recite when facing a challenge. It is hard to fail, but it is worse never to have tried to succeed. I'd spent years playing it safe at Harper Construction, being the good son who followed the rules. Look where that had gotten me. By morning, my path was clear again. If I couldn't buy the land legally, I'd find another way to stop the development. I might have lost this battle, but the war for Memory Lake was just beginning. I drove straight to Wisconsin, determination fueling me more effectively than the gas station coffee cooling in my cup holder. The farmhouse was still there, of course. The development wouldn't start for weeks, but it already felt different, like a museum display of something that once was alive. I spent that first day walking the property, memorizing every tree, every rock, every curve of the shoreline. This land was in my blood. I wouldn't let it become another cookie-cutter development without a fight. The local diner in Spooner became my unofficial headquarters. I'd sit in the corner booth with my laptop, researching environmental regulations, zoning laws, anything that might give me leverage against sunrise development. Word spreads fast in small towns. By my third day camped out at the diner, Grandpa's old friends started dropping by my table. Men with weathered hands and faded caps who remembered when Memory Lake was a place where local kids learned to swim and fish. "Heard you're trying to save Joe's place," said Earl Wilson, who taught chemistry at the high school for 40 years before retiring. "Count me in." "Those developers don't know what they're getting into," added Mike Larson, sliding into booth across from me. "We don't take kindly to outsiders bulldozing our memories." Before I knew it, I had a small army of retired teachers, former loggers, and lifelong Wisconsin residents ready to help. They brought historical records showing fish spawning grounds that could trigger environmental protections. They connected me with local conservation groups concerned about watershed management. We found potential issues with the development plans, inadequate runoff controls, questionable wetland impact assessments, proposed dock structures that might violate state regulations. Small things individually, but together they might be enough to delay construction, force costly revisions, or at least buy us time. Dad called one evening, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "What exactly do you think you're doing up there?" Sunrise just got hit with environmental impact inquiries from 3 different agencies. I couldn't help smiling, though he couldn't see it. "Just making sure everyone follows the rules, Dad. Isn't that what you always taught me?" "This is pathetic, Zach. You can't stop progress. All you're doing is delaying the inevitable and making enemies." "Maybe," I admitted, "but I'm finally making friends too. Real ones." And it was true. For the first time in my life, I felt part of something authentic. These weren't business connections built on mutual advantage. These were relationships forged in shared purpose and genuine affection for a place that mattered to all of us. Still, I knew we were fighting an uphill battle. Sunrise had money, lawyers, and the backing of the county's Economic Development Board, which saw the project as a tax revenue goldmine. Our small victories were just speed bumps on their road to breaking ground. Then one rainy evening, everything changed. I was heading back to the motel that had become my temporary home when I spotted an ancient Volkswagen van on the shoulder of the road, hazard lights blinking weakly in the gathering dusk. Steam billowed from under the hood, mixing with the rain to create an ethereal fog around the vehicle. In Minnesota, you don't drive past a stranded motorist, especially when the temperature is dropping and the nearest service station is miles away. I pulled over, grabbing the flashlight from my glove compartment. A figure in a yellow rain jacket was bent over the engine compartment, muttering what sounded suspiciously like creative curses directed at German engineering. "Need a hand?" I called, approaching with my flashlight beam pointed at the ground. The figure straightened and turned, pushing back a hood to reveal a face I hadn't seen in at least 15 years, though I recognized it immediately. "Zach Harper?" Is that you? It was Emily Winters. Her curly hair was shorter now, with strands of premature silver that caught the flashlight beam, but her eyes were the same bright blue that had made my teenage heart do somersaults every summer when her family visited their cabin across the lake. Emily, what are you doing here? I aimed my light at the van's engine, which was clearly having some kind of catastrophic meltdown. I could ask you the same thing, she laughed, wiping her hands on a rag. Last I heard, you were some big-shot executive in Minneapolis. That's old news, I replied, feeling a smile spread across my face despite the rain soaking through my jacket. What's wrong with your van? She shrugged. Besides being old enough to vote, run for office, and collect Social Security, the radiator's shot. I was heading to my parents' old cabin to do some renovations. 10 minutes later, we were in my car heading towards Spooner, her ancient VW left in the capable hands of the only mechanic in 3 counties who still worked on air-cooled engines. The conversation flowed as easily as if we'd last seen each other yesterday instead of half a lifetime ago. So you're really the one stirring up trouble for Sunrise Development? She asked as we settled into a booth at the diner, steam rising from our coffee mugs. My mom sent me an article from the local paper. Local group challenges lake development on environmental grounds. They didn't name you, but I should have guessed. I gave her the abbreviated version of everything that had happened, Grandpa's death, the missing will, my resignation, and the sale of my Minneapolis life. So now I'm the local troublemaker. I concluded, living in the Lakeview Motel and trying to file enough paperwork to bury Sunrise in red tape. Emily studied me over the rim of her coffee mug, those blue eyes seeing more than I was comfortable sharing. You're not just doing this for your grandfather, she said finally. You're doing it for yourself, too, because that lake is part of who you are. Something in her assessment hit home in a way I hadn't expected. I'd been so focused on honoring Grandpa's wishes that I hadn't fully acknowledged how much I needed this fight for my own sake. Maybe, I admitted. What about you? What brings the great Emily Winters back to Wisconsin? Last I heard, you were designing gardens for celebrities in California. She laughed, a sound as bright and unexpected as wind chimes in a forest. Close. Landscape architect for upscale developments in San Diego. Lots of drought-resistant native plants and infinity pools that nobody actually swims in. Sounds glamorous. It paid well, she shrugged. But after 10 years of creating artificial natural spaces for people who want nature without the inconvenience of actual wildlife, I needed a break. When Mom told me she was selling their cabin, I figured I'd come fix it up first, maybe stay a while. We talked until the waitress started stacking chairs on tables around us, a not-so-subtle hint that the diner was closing. I offered Emily the couch in my motel room for the night, but she had already arranged to stay with a family friend in town. Let me buy you breakfast tomorrow, she suggested as I dropped her off. I want to hear more about your guerrilla campaign to save Memory Lake. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks, despite the lumpy motel mattress and the occasional sound of trucks on the highway. Something about seeing Emily again had shifted my perspective. I wasn't just fighting against my father and Sunrise. I was fighting for something worth preserving. Over pancakes the next morning, I spread out maps and documents showing what we'd accomplished so far. Emily asked insightful questions, occasionally making notes in a small sketchbook she pulled from her bag. The environmental angle is smart, she nodded, but it'll only delay them, not stop them. These big developers have ways of working around regulations. Trust me. I know, I sighed, but it's all we've got right now. She tapped her pen against her coffee mug, thinking, maybe not. What if there was a competing vision for Memory Lake? Something that preserved its character while still being economically viable. Like what? Like... She flipped to a fresh page in her sketchbook and began sketching rapidly. A different kind of development. Something that honors the history of the place instead of erasing it. I watched as her pen moved across the paper, creating a vision that seemed pulled directly from my childhood memories. Small, thoughtfully placed cabins nestled among the trees. A central lodge that looked remarkably like Grandpa's barn. Fishing docks and canoe launches that respected the shoreline. A retreat, she explained, still sketching. Not a resort, not a subdivision. A place where people can disconnect from screens and reconnect with nature, where kids can have the kind of summers we had. It's perfect. I breathed, watching the concept take shape. But I don't own the land. Sunrise does. Emily looked up, her eyes bright with a particular fire that comes with creative inspiration. Not yet they don't. Your father signed a contract, but has the sale closed? Has money changed hands? I thought back to my father's words. They're breaking ground next month. I don't think so. There's usually a due diligence period with these deals. Then we still have a chance, she said, turning her sketchbook so I could see the full concept. What if we make Sunrise an offer they can't refuse? With what money? I have enough to buy the farm from Dad, but not to outbid a major developer. We don't need to outbid them, Emily explained, her excitement contagious. We need to present an alternative that makes more sense. A plan that turns a local opposition into support, that generates positive PR instead of environmental lawsuits, that preserves a legacy while still creating value. As she outlined her vision, a nostalgic retreat that would appeal to city dwellers looking for an authentic wilderness experience, I felt something awakening inside me. Not just hope, but possibility. This wasn't just about stopping something bad from happening. It was about creating something good. Emily pulled out a napkin and started sketching a logo, Memory Lake Retreat, in a vintage-style font, with a silhouette of pine trees and a small fishing boat on the water. People are hungry for authenticity, Zach. They want to reconnect with simpler times. Your grandfather's farm is a time machine to a world before smartphones and social media. That's worth more than another cookie-cutter luxury development. I stared at her drawing, memories flooding back. Campfires by the lake, vinyl records playing on Grandpa's old turntable, the taste of freshly caught fish cooked over open flames. Emily had captured the essence of what made Memory Lake special. This could work, I said slowly, ideas beginning to coalesce. We could offer rustic cabins, fishing guides, kayak rentals, host weekend vinyl listening parties, and stargazing nights. Emily nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. And local foods, partnerships with Wisconsin breweries, maybe even workshops where city folks can learn traditional skills like woodworking or fly tying. The more we talked, the more real it became. Not just a desperate plan to block development, but a vision for preserving Memory Lake's soul while giving it new purpose. We need investors, I mused, mentally calculating startup costs, and a business plan solid enough to convince my father that this is a better option than Sunrise's cookie-cutter approach. Emily tapped her pen against the napkin logo. Let me work on some proper renderings tonight. You start on the business plan. Between my design background and your financial expertise, we might just pull this off. As I looked at her across the table, excitement dancing in her eyes, I realized this wasn't just about the lake anymore. It was about reclaiming a part of myself I'd left behind when I traded Grandpa's wisdom for corporate ambition. It was about finding a future that honored the past instead of bulldozing it. Ralph Waldo Emerson once wrote, "Freedom is not the right to live as we please, but the right to find how we ought to live." For the first time in years, I felt truly free. Not because I'd escaped my office job, but because I'd found a path that felt authentically mine. Emily smiled, as if reading my thoughts. This isn't just about saving a lake, is it? No, I agreed. I think it's about something much bigger. Turning dreams into reality requires 3 things: vision, determination, and money. Emily and I had the first 2 in spades. The third proved trickier. We spent the next 2 weeks perfecting our business plan for Memory Lake Retreat. Emily created stunning renderings that captured the nostalgic essence we envisioned. Cozy wooden cabins nestled among the pines, vintage Airstream trailers gleaming in the sunlight, a renovated barn serving as a central lodge with record players and board games instead of TVs and Wi-Fi. I crunched numbers until my calculator nearly gave up, creating financial projections that showed profitability by year 3. The plan looked solid on paper, but we faced a massive obstacle. Sunrise Development still owned the land, and they weren't selling. We need leverage, Emily said one morning over breakfast at the Spooner Diner. Something that makes it more attractive for them to sell to us than to develop. I push my eggs around my plate. They've already invested in engineering and marketing. The economic incentives all point to them bulldozing everything. Emily tapped her pen against her coffee mug, thinking, let's take the afternoon off from strategizing. Sometimes the best ideas come when you're not trying so hard. That afternoon, we drove out to Memory Lake. Despite technically being Sunrise property now, no one was around to stop us from walking the shoreline one more time. We sat on the weathered dock, laptops open, half-heartedly researching zoning laws and environmental regulations, while mostly just soaking in the quiet beauty of the place. The late spring sun warmed the board beneath us, and a light breeze carried the scent of pine and fresh water. I can't believe this could all be gone, I said, gesturing to the pristine shoreline, replaced by manicured lawns and infinity pools. Emily didn't answer. She was staring intently at something near her foot. Suddenly, a small brown speckled object launched itself through the air and landed with a wet plop directly on her keyboard. What the? She jumped, then started laughing. A tiny frog, no bigger than a quarter, sat on her J key, looking rather pleased with itself. It was mottled brown and gray with a distinctive dark, triangular patch between its eyes and tiny speckles covering its bumpy skin. Well, hello there, Emily said, carefully closing her laptop to take a picture with her phone. I think we've got a volunteer environmental consultant. The little amphibian responded with a series of rapid-fire croaks that seemed impossibly loud for its size. Very passionate about saving the lake, aren't you? I chuckled as Emily snapped photos from different angles. She immediately posted it to our Save Memory Lake Facebook page with the caption, "When you're brainstorming how to save a lake and Mother Nature sends her own representative to the meeting, this little guy has opinions." We laughed it off and spent another hour by the lake before heading back to town for dinner. That evening, as we sat in the diner sharing a slice of blueberry pie, Emily was scrolling through the comments on her fraud post. "Whoa," she suddenly said, sitting up straight. "Look at this comment." She turned her phone toward me. Someone named Dr. Wetlands had written that a Blanchard's cricket frog, Acres blanchardi, listed as endangered in Wisconsin with special protected status. They're incredibly rare this far north. You should report this sighting to the DNR immediately. P.S. Their habitat is protected by state law. Emily's eyes met mine, a slow smile spreading across her face. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? The next morning, we were back at the lake with better cameras, recording equipment, and printouts of Wisconsin endangered species guidelines. Sure enough, our little environmental consultant wasn't alone. After a few hours of careful searching along the shoreline, we documented at least 3 distinct colonies of the tiny frogs. Emily, who'd stayed up half the night researching, became our impromptu amphibian expert. Their population has declined by over 80% in Wisconsin due to habitat loss, she explained as we photographed another cluster of the spotted greenhoppers. The wetlands around Memory Lake are perfect for them. Shallow water with plenty of vegetation and minimal disturbance. We compiled our findings and submitted them to the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources that same day. Our fraud discovery gave us a critical foothold, but Emily didn't stop there. Through conversations with locals at the diner, she learned that Memory Lake had cultural significance for the Ojibwe tribe, whose ancestral lands included this part of Wisconsin. A quick drive to the Tribal Cultural Center led to meetings with elders who confirmed the lake's historical importance. Meanwhile, I set up a YouTube channel documenting our journey to save Memory Lake. Our first video explained the endangered frogs, the cultural history, and our vision for preserving both while creating a sustainable retreat. It was amateur and earnest, just me talking to camera, while Emily showed her frog photos. 53 people watched it. Not exactly viral, but it was a beginning. Our frog post on Facebook, however, was gaining traction. Local environmental groups shared it, then a state conservation organization. A biology professor from UW-Madison commented, offering to bring students to document the habitat. A reporter from the local paper reached out for an interview. We're becoming the fraud people. I joked to Emily as we prepared for the reporter's visit. Worse things to be known for, she shrugged. Besides, these little guys might just save the lake. With growing local support, We finally secured a meeting with Blake Peterson, Sunrise Development's project director, at their Minneapolis headquarters. Peterson was a corporate archetype in his tailored suit and power tie, with the confident smile of someone used to getting his way. He listened to our pitch with the polite attention of someone humoring a child's fantasy. When we finished, he leaned forward with practiced sympathy. "I appreciate your passion," he said, deliberately not looking at our fraud documentation. "But we've already invested significantly in engineering and marketing for Memory Lake Estates. The board has approved the plans. We're prepared to match what you paid for property," I replied, "plus compensation for your planning expenses." Peterson's smile never reached his eyes. "Mr. Harper, this project represents a potential $24 million in revenue for Sunrise. Your offer isn't even in the ballpark." "What about the Blanchard's cricket frogs?" Emily asked, sliding her phone across the desk to show him photos. "They're endangered in Wisconsin. Their habitat is protected under state law." Peterson glanced at the photo and shrugged. "Environmental reviews are standard procedure. We'll create mitigation areas if necessary." "And the Ojibwe cultural significance?" Emily pressed. "The Tribal Council is filing paperwork for historical designation." "Again, standard procedure," Peterson replied, though I noticed a slight tightening around his eyes. "We've dealt with similar issues before." Peterson was right, of course. Sunrise had the resources to fight this battle on every front. But as we drove back to Wisconsin that evening, I realized something important. We weren't trying to stop all development everywhere. We just needed to save this one lake, this one farm. Maybe that made our odds a little better. Our fraud post continued to gain traction online. The biology professor brought students to formally document the habitat. The Tribal Preservation Office began the process of registering Memory Lake as a culturally significant site. The local newspaper ran an article about the unlikely environmentalists with a photo of Emily holding one of the tiny frogs. Each small media mention brought more supporters. People began calling county commissioners, expressing concerns about the development. Letters appeared in local newspapers. Comments piled up on Sunrise's social media pages. Our unlikely mascot, whom Emily had nicknamed Ribbit, despite that not being the sound cricket frogs actually make, became something of a local celebrity. Children sent us frog drawings. A local brewery named a seasonal ale frog hop IPA in solidarity with our cause. Someone even showed up at the diner wearing a homemade T-shirt with Save Ribbit's Home printed across the front. None of it seemed sufficient to stop a corporate juggernaut, until an unexpected ally emerged. A reporter from a regional environmental blog interviewed us, then reached out to Sunrise Development for comment on their plans to destroy endangered habitats and culturally significant sites. When Sunrise provided a boilerplate response about commitment to sustainable development, the reporter dug deeper, researching Sunrise's history with similar projects. The resulting expose wasn't flattering. It detailed previous developments where Sunrise had promised environmental protections but delivered cookie-cutter subdivisions with token conservation areas. The article was picked up by larger outlets, creating a small PR crisis for the company. Then came the knockout punch. Goldman Sachs published an analyst report questioning Sunrise's development pipeline, specifically citing Memory Lake as a project mired in environmental controversy with significant regulatory hurdles and potential for costly delays. The report suggested Sunrise might be overextended, with too many projects facing similar challenges. Sunrise's stock dropped 4% the next day. For a publicly traded company, negative analyst coverage and stock declines changed the calculation entirely. Suddenly, a small project in Wisconsin didn't look worth the headache it was causing. Peterson called me on a Wednesday morning, his tone considerably less dismissive. "We've reviewed your proposal," he said without preamble. "The board is willing to consider selling the Memory Lake property." My heart leaped, but I kept my voice steady. "At the price we proposed?" "Plus 50%, he countered. "We need to recoup our planning costs and show some return." It was steep, 50% more than my father had received, but still within reach if we stretched our budget to the absolute limit. I would need to liquidate every investment, max out our loan capacity, and still would barely be enough. I need 24 hours to confirm financing, I told Peterson. You have until close of business tomorrow, he replied. After that, we proceed with development regardless of the noise. That night, Emily and I sat on the farmhouse porch, calculating and recalculating our finances. With the bank loan, my remaining savings, and selling my last investment accounts, we could just barely make the numbers work. It's everything we have, I said finally. If this fails, we're completely broke. Emily took my hand. Sometimes you have to risk everything for what matters. The next day, I called Peterson and accepted the deal. Within a week, the lawyers had drawn up the paperwork. Within a month, the property was ours, along with a mountain of debt that would keep me awake at night for years to come. But standing on the lakeshore the day we closed, watching the sun sparkle on the water that now belonged to us, money seemed like a small price to pay for something so precious. Emily released our little frog friend, who had been living in a makeshift terrarium during our motel stay, back into his natural habitat, with a small ceremony that we, of course, filmed for our growing online audience. Thank you for saving your home, she told the tiny amphibian before I hopped away into the reeds. We'll take it from here. We moved into the farmhouse immediately and started work. The reality of what we'd undertaken hit, like a sledgehammer. The bar needed a new roof and structural repairs before it could become our lodge. The ancient plumbing in the farmhouse threatened to flood us out every other day. And we discovered that building permits in rural Wisconsin move at approximately the speed of molasses in January. Remind me again why we didn't just buy a nice established business? I groaned one evening, collapsing onto the porch swing after a day of removing rusty nails from reclaimed barnwood. Emily handed me a cold beer and sat beside me, because we're either visionaries or complete idiots. Jury's still out. We work from sunrise to well past sunset every day. I discovered muscles I didn't know existed and developed a newfound respect for people who work with their hands for a living. Emily revealed herself to be surprisingly handy with power tools, putting my city boy skills to shame. Where did you learn to do all this? I asked one day as she confidently rewired a light fixture. My dad, she replied, not looking up from her work. He believed girls should know how to fix things just as well as boys. Said independence was the greatest gift he could give me. I thought about my own father, whose lessons had all revolved around business strategy and corporate politics. Never once had he taught me to build something tangible, something real. The contrast couldn't have been starker. By mid-June, we had the first 3 cabins ready and the central lodge taking shape. Our bank account was running dangerously low, but we'd come too far to stop now. Our social media following continued to grow as we documented each step of the transformation. People love a good redemption story, Emily said as she edited our latest video update. From endangered frog habitat to sustainable retreat, it practically writes itself. Our weekly videos showed the cabins taking shape, vintage record players being installed. Emily's landscaping work using native Wisconsin plants. We included a frog cam segment in each video, showing our amphibian friends thriving in their protected wetlands. The local newspaper did another feature, this time on the economic benefits our project might bring to the area. A regional travel blogger visited and wrote a glowing preview. Then in late July, something unexpected happened. A popular travel vlogger with over 2 million subscribers stumbled across our channel and shared our story. You guys have to check out this amazing project in Wisconsin, she told her followers. They saved an endangered species, and they're building this incredible nostalgic retreat. It's like stepping back in time in the best possible way. Overnight, our subscriber count jumped from a few hundred to over 20,000. Our inbox flooded with messages from people wanting to know when they could book a stay, offering skills or materials to help, or simply sharing their own memories of summers by lakes in simpler times. The unexpected attention brought financial relief too. A small Wisconsin craft brewery offered to sponsor our fire pit area in exchange for serving their Frog Hop IPA. A vinyl record company wanted to supply players and records for the cabins. A vintage trailer enthusiast offered to loan us 2 restored Airstreams for the season. Just as momentum was building, disaster struck. A massive summer storm rolled through western Wisconsin, dropping nearly 8 inches of rain in 24 hours. We worked through the night in pounding rain, trying to divert water from the construction sites and save our little frog friends from being washed away from their habitats. By morning, 2 of our nearly completed cabins had significant water damage, and part of the new lodge roof had collapsed. The frog habitats, thankfully, were designed to handle water fluctuations. Nature had prepared them better than we had prepared our structures. I stood in the muddy aftermath, rain still dripping from soaked pines, and felt the feet washing over me. We had no insurance yet, no financial cushion, and our opening date was just 3 weeks away. Maybe this is a sign, I said to Emily, who was wringing water from her hair. Maybe some dreams aren't meant to be. She looked at me with those determined blue eyes I'd come to rely on. Or maybe it's just a test to see how badly we want it. Besides, if those little frogs can survive in Wisconsin for thousands of years, surely we can handle one storm. Before I could respond, a truck pulled into our muddy driveway, followed by another and another. Earl Wilson stepped out of the first one, carrying tools and wearing waterproof overalls. Behind him came Mike Larson, and at least a dozen other locals we'd gotten to know over the past months. "Heard you folks could use some help," Earl said simply, as if showing up to rebuild someone's dream was the most natural thing in the world. For the next 2 weeks, our property transformed into a barn raising of sorts. Locals I barely knew brought food, tools, and willing hands. Retired contractors offered expertise. High school kids looking for summer work pitched in for minimum wage, and all the pizza they could eat. Our YouTube followers rallied too. A roofing company from Minneapolis donated materials. A furniture maker from Michigan sent handcrafted Adirondack chairs for the lakefront. People we'd never met invested their time and resources in our vision, turning disaster into an unexpected blessing. The work that would have taken Emily and me a month was completed in 10 days. When the last volunteer left and we stood alone surveying the transformed property, I felt a lump in my throat. I've never experienced anything like this, I admitted. In Minneapolis, I barely knew my neighbors' names. Emily squeezed my hand. That's the difference between a community and just a place to live. 2 days before our grand opening, we welcomed our first test guests, the elderly couple from Iowa who'd been the first to book after seeing our videos. Harold and Margaret Jenkins had been married for 40 years and wanted to celebrate somewhere special. I was a nervous wreck as they pulled up in their sensible sedan. What if the cabins weren't comfortable enough? What if they hated the no Wi-Fi policy? What if this whole concept only appealed to people in theory, but not in practice? Harold stepped out first, helping Margaret with exaggerated gallantry that made her sweat his arm affectionately. They stood for a moment, taking the view of the lake through the pines, the meticulously restored cabins with their cheerful red doors, the Adirondack chairs lined up along the shore. "Well," Harold said finally, his voice thick with emotion, "this looks just like the place my parents took us when I was a boy." Margaret nodded, squeezing his hand. "It feels like coming home to somewhere we've never been." Those words, coming home to somewhere we've never been, captured exactly what we've been trying to create. Not just nostalgia, but a connection to something authentic and timeless. That evening, as Fleetwood Mac's Rumors played on the vintage record player in the lodge, I watched Harold and Margaret Slow dancing by the fire pit, backlit by the setting sun. They moved with the comfortable rhythm of people who had grown together through decades, their silhouettes merging with the twilight. Other guests would arrive in 2 days, a family with teenagers looking to disconnect from screens, a group of 30-something friends wanting a weekend of board games and stargazing, a solo traveler seeking quiet. Our calendar for the season was filling up fast, thanks to the unexpected online attention. As the Jenkinses returned to their cabin for the night, Margaret paused to hug us both. "You've given us 1975 back," she whispered, "just for a little while." In that moment, all the financial stress, physical exhaustion, and uncertainty seemed worth it. We created something real, something that mattered to people in a way that luxury condos never could. The grand opening weekend exceeded our wildest expectations. Every cabin was full. The Airstreams were a hit with the younger guests, and everyone from toddlers to grandparents seemed to find something to love about Memory Lake Retreat. Kids who had never been without Wi-Fi discovered the joy of catching frogs, carefully supervised to protect our endangered friends, and building sandcastles. Parents reconnected with their children over board games instead of competing with smartphones for attention. Couples found quiet moments together on the lakefront as fireflies danced above the water. Our YouTube channel continued to grow, with guests asking to be featured in our updates. Bookings extended well into fall, and we started a waiting list for the following summer. Publications like Midwest Living and even Travel Plus Leisure contacted us about features. One evening in late August, with the retreat running smoothly and the first hint of autumn coolness in the air, Emily and I took a rare moment alone by the lake. The sunset painted the water gold and pink, and somewhere in the distance, a loon called mournfully. "Do you remember the first time we sat here?" she asked, her head resting on my shoulder. "When that little frog jumped on my laptop?" I nodded, marveling at how much had changed in just a few months. Our unlikely hero. Who knew that little guy would help us save all this? "I think life's like that sometimes," she mused. "The biggest changes come from the smallest moments, if you're paying attention." Henry David Thoreau wrote, "If you have built castles in the air, your work need not be lost. That is where they should be. Now put the foundations under them." Emily and I had built our castle in the air, then somehow managed to ground in reality through sheer stubbornness, unexpected kindness from others, and one very helpful endangered frog. As twilight deepened around us, I realized I'd been carrying something in my pocket for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment. This quiet evening, with the scent of pine in the air and the gentle lapping of the lake against the shore, felt right. I shifted away slightly, reaching into my pocket for the small box. Emily looked at me questioningly. "You were with me when I was nobody," I said softly, opening the box to reveal a simple ring with a small pearl. "Will you be with me now that I'm becoming someone?" Emily's eyes widened, then filled with tears that caught the last light of day. For a terrifying moment, she said nothing, and I wonder if I'd misjudged everything. Then she smiled, that radiant smile that had guided me through the darkest moments of the past months. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times yes. We embraced under the emerging stars, the future stretching before us like the lake, sometimes calm, sometimes stormy, but always worth the journey. As dawn broke the next morning, I stood on the porch of the farmhouse, watching mist rise from the lake in ghostly tendrils. Emily was still asleep, the pearl ring glinting on her finger. I breathed deeply, savoring the pine-scented air and the profound sense of rightness that had settled in my soul. Movement caught my eye, a car turning into our long driveway, headlights cutting through the morning mist. As it drew closer, my stomach dropped. I recognized the sleek black Lexus, as out of place here as a tuxedo at a swimming hole. My father had come to Memory Lake. I watched my father's Lexus slowly wind its way up our gravel driveway, feeling like I was in one of those dreams where you can't move no matter how hard you try. The car looked impossibly out of place among our rustic cabins and vintage Airstreams, like a spaceship landing in an Amish village. He parked next to my mud-splattered pickup truck, a symbolic contrast if there ever was one. For a moment, he just sat there, staring through the windshield at the retreat we'd built. Then he stepped out, immaculate in pressed khakis and a golf shirt that probably cost more than all the clothes I currently own combined. "Morning, Dad," I called, not moving from my position on the porch. Let him come to me, for once. He approached slowly, taking in the property with sharp eyes that had evaluated countless construction sites over the years. His expression was unreadable, but I noticed he took care to stay on the wooden pathway Emily had built, avoiding the morning dew on the grass, always protecting those Italian leather loafers. "So this is what you've been up to," he said finally, coming to a stop at the bottom of the porch steps. "This is it." I didn't elaborate. Let him ask if he wanted to know more. An awkward silence stretched between us, filled with the morning sound of birds and the distant lapping of lake water against the shore. Somewhere behind me in the farmhouse, I heard Emily moving around, probably wondering who had arrived so early. Dad cleared his throat. "Looks like you've been busy." The king of understatement. In the time since we'd last spoken, I'd liquidated my life savings, built a business from scratch, survived a natural disaster, and gotten engaged. Busy didn't quite cover it. Coffee. I offered, not because I particularly wanted to share my morning brew with him, but because some Midwestern hospitality habits die hard. He nodded, and I gestured to the porch swing while I went inside to pour him a cup. Emily was in the kitchen, her eyebrows raised in silent question as she nodded toward the window. My father, I explained quietly, showed up out of nowhere. She squeezed my arm. Want me to disappear for a bit? I shook my head. No, you're family now. More than he is, honestly. When I returned to the porch, Dad had moved from the steps to the swing, his posture stiff as though afraid the rustic furniture might soil his clothes. I handed him a mug of black coffee. He'd never taken it any other way, and settled into the rocking chair across from him. Nice view, he said, gesturing toward the lake with his mug. Morning mist was still rising from the water, creating an almost mystical scene with the pines silhouetted against the brightening sky. Grandpa always said it was the most beautiful spot in Wisconsin. Dad's mouth tightened slightly at the mention of his father, but he didn't take the bait. Instead, he nodded toward the row of cabins. Full house. Booked solid through October, I confirmed, unable to keep a hint of pride from my voice. And we've already got a waiting list for next season. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or grudging respect. He took a sip of coffee, then set the mug carefully on the small table beside the swing. Sunrise Development's stock dropped 12% last quarter. He said abruptly, the board fired the CEO last week. This was news to me, but I kept my expression neutral. Sorry to hear that. Are you? His eyes, so like mine in color but so different in what they valued, fixed on my face. Your little fraud campaign cost them millions. Cost me, too, as a major shareholder. So that's why he was here. Money. It was always about money with him. The frauds were here first, I said with a shrug. And they didn't cost you anything. Your own choices did that. For a moment, I thought he might get up and leave. His jaw clenched the way it used to when I was a teenager and said something he considered disrespectful. But then, surprisingly, the tension left his shoulders. You're right, he admitted. The words sounded like they'd been pulled from him with pliers. I made a series of poor decisions, starting with how I handled Grandpa's property. Now it was my turn to be surprised. In 34 years, I'd never heard my father admit he was wrong about anything more significant than a restaurant choice. Grandpa wanted this place preserved. I said carefully, it was his legacy. Dad nodded slowly. I know that now. I was too focused on what it could be worth to remember what it was already worth. The door opened behind me, and Emily stepped out carrying her own coffee mug. Good morning, she said politely, crossing to stand beside my chair. Her presence felt like reinforcement arriving on a battlefield. Dad stood, ever the businessman with his ingrained courtesies. You must be Emily. I've seen your videos. She shook his extended hand briefly. And you must be Martin. I've heard about you. The way she said it made it clear exactly what she'd heard, but Dad just nodded, accepting the implicit judgment. I'd like a tour, he said, turning back to me. See what you've done with the place. Part of me wanted to refuse, to tell him he'd lost the right to any piece of memory like the moment he'd tried to pave it over for profit. But curiosity won out. What was he really doing here? For the next hour, I showed him everything. The carefully restored cabins with their vintage furnishings, the converted barn with its record players and board games, the fire pit area where guests gathered each evening, the dock where we taught kids to fish with the same patience Grandpa had once shown me. Dad asked surprisingly thoughtful questions about our business model, our marketing approach, our plans for the winter season. He examined the craftsmanship of our renovations with a professional eye, occasionally nodding with what seemed like genuine approval. As we walked, early rising guests emerged from their cabins. They greeted me by name, shared stories about their kids' first fish caught the day before, asked Emily about her wildflower identification hike scheduled for that afternoon. The sense of community was palpable, and I noticed Dad watching these interactions with an expression I couldn't quite read. We ended the tour at the small memorial we created for Grandpa, a simple stone bench facing the lake, engraved with his favorite saying, "Time spent by the water is never wasted." Dad stood silent for a long moment, looking at the bench, then out at the lake that bore our family name. "He would have loved this," he said finally, his voice rough with an emotion I'd rarely heard from him. All of it. Coming from him, it felt like the highest possible praise. "That was the idea," I replied, "to honor what he built." Dad turned to face me directly. "I came here to apologize, Zach. What I did, trying to sell this place, the business with Pierce's will, it was wrong. I told myself it was just business, but it wasn't. It was personal and it was petty. The words hung in the morning air between us. Part of me had waited decades to hear my father apologize for anything. Another part wondered what he wanted in return. Why now? I asked. It's been months. "3 things," he replied, surprisingly candid. "First, your YouTube channel. Watching what you've built here, seeing the guest responses, it made me question some choices I've made." He gestured toward the cabins. "Second, Sunrise's collapse showed me that what looks profitable on paper isn't always sustainable in reality. The quick money I chased would have vanished anyway. And third," I prompted when he paused, "your brother Tom left the company last month, started his own firm, and took our 3 biggest clients with him." The grimace that crossed his face suggested this betrayal had cut deeper than he wanted to admit. So there it was. Dad was alone, professionally and personally, and suddenly remembering he had another son. "I'm sorry about Tom," I said, and meant it. Family betrayal hurts, regardless of history. Dad shrugged, aiming for nonchalance but missing by a mile. "It's made me reevaluate some things, including how I've treated you." We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of decades of complicated father-son history hanging between us. In the distance, a loon called across the lake, its haunting cries seeming to ask what happened next. "I don't expect us to suddenly become best friends," Dad continued, "but I thought maybe we could start over. Clean slate. Once, those words would have meant everything to me. The validation and acceptance I craved throughout my youth. Now, standing on the land I'd fought to save, beside the lake that had shaped my childhood, I realized I no longer needed his approval to know my own worth. I don't believe in clean slates," I told him honestly. "Our history is what it is, but I'm open to writing a different chapter going forward." Relief flickered across his face. "That's fair. More than fair, considering. Just be clear," I added, "this place stays exactly as it is. No development, no improvements, no corporate partnerships." "Understood." He almost smiled. "Though I do have some contacts that might help with your winter season cash flow issues." Of course, he'd spotted that weakness in our business model. Once a developer, always a developer. "We can talk about it," I conceded, "over dinner sometime." "Not here, not now." He nodded, accepting the boundary. "I should get going. I've taken enough of your morning." As we walked back toward his car, Emily joined us, slipping her hand into mine in a gesture that was both supportive and subtly territorial. "You've got a good team here," Dad said, nodding toward Emily. "Don't screw it up like I did with your mother." It was perhaps the most personal advice he'd ever offered me, and its uncharacteristic candor caught me off guard. "I won't," I promised, looking at Emily rather than him. Dad extended his hand, and I shook it. A businesslike conclusion to what had been, for us, an unusually emotional conversation. As he drove away, the Lexus looking even more out of place going than it had coming, Emily squeezed my hand. "You okay?" I nodded, surprised to find it was true. "Yeah, actually I am." Over the next year, Memory Lake Retreat exceeded even our optimistic projections. Fall brought leaf peepers and fishing enthusiasts. Winter, which we'd feared would be our slow season, became unexpectedly popular after a travel writer described our digital detox Christmas package as the antidote to modern holiday stress. Spring brought birdwatchers and families looking for spring break alternatives. Dad and I met for dinner every few months, neutral territory where we carefully built a relationship based less on family obligation and more on mutual respect. He never fully understood my choices, just as I never fully embraced his values, but we found a middle ground that felt, if not warm, then at least honest. The Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources officially designated part of our property as protected habitat for the Blanchard's cricket frogs, which thrived under our careful stewardship. Our little amphibian mascots even made the front page of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel in a feature about successful conservation efforts. In June, almost exactly a year after we opened, Emily and I were married on the lakeshore. We kept it simple. No formal attire, no elaborate decorations beyond what nature provided. Our guests sat on blankets and Adirondack chairs as we exchanged vows with bare feet in the sand and the setting sun turning the lake to go behind us. Dad came, looking uncomfortable in business, casual rather than his usual suit, but he made an effort to chat with Emily's parents and even managed a civil conversation with Sheriff Miller about local fishing regulations. Some wounds heal slowly, but they do heal. After the small reception, when most guests had returned to their cabins or driven back to town, Emily and I walked along the lakeshore in the deepening twilight. "Happy?" she asked, her new ring catching the last light of day. More than I knew was possible. I admitted, "Sometimes I still can't believe we pulled this off." She laughed softly. "Which part? Saving the lake, building a successful business, or finding each other?" "All of it," I said, pulling her close as we walked. The whole improbable story. Later that evening, I found myself alone on the dock, feet dangling in the cool water, looking up at stars that seemed close enough to touch. The Milky Way stretched across the sky, impossibly bright away from city lights, just as it had when Grandpa first taught me constellation names decades ago. I thought about paths not taken, the corporate career I'd abandoned, the safe choices I'd rejected, the leap of faith that had brought me here. Grandpa used to say that a lake teaches you patience, that water finds its level in its own time. Maybe lives do too. As summer deepened, our second season brought repeat guests who felt like old friends and new visitors who quickly became part of our growing community. Journalists and travel writers continued to discover us, each article bringing another wave of bookings. Sunset Magazine featured us in their American Getaways issue, calling Memory Lake Retreat the heart of American nostalgia, a place where the best parts of our past are preserved while the worst are gracefully left behind. The writer captured something essential about what we created. Not just a business, but a sanctuary for a simple way of connecting with each other and the natural world. Emily expanded her role beyond design, creating nature programs for guests and partnering with local artisans to sell their work in our small gift shop. I found myself spending less time on budgets and bookings, and more time teaching kids to fish or leading canoe trips across the lake. "You know what I love about this place?" A guest told me one evening as we sat by the fire pit, watching sparks rise toward the stars. "It feels like coming home to somewhere I've never been before." It wasn't the first time I'd heard those words. The sentiment echoed what Margaret Jenkins had said during our first season, what dozens of guests had written in our guest book since. There was something universal in that feeling, the recognition of something authentic that resonates across generations. Alexander Graham Bell once said, "When one door closes, another opens, but we often look so long and so regretfully upon the closed door that we do not see the one which is open for us." Standing on the shore of Memory Lake, watching children skip stones across water that might have been buried under concrete condos, I understood the wisdom in those words. My grandfather's death had closed one door. My father's betrayal had slammed another. But in their place, something remarkable had opened. Not just a business, but a life aligned to my deepest values, shared with a partner who saw the same vision. Every evening now, Emily and I make time to sit by the lake, watching the light change on the water. Sometimes we talk about the future, expanding the retreat, starting a family, preserving this place for generations to come. Other times we simply sit in comfortable silence, listening to the timeless conversation between wind and water. And in those quiet moments, I sometimes imagine I can hear the lake whispering, "You did it. You're home." Because I am. Not just physically in this place I've loved since childhood, but home in a deeper sense, at peace with my choices, aligned with my purpose, surrounded by a community of people who value what I value. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't about excusing what happened. It's about refusing to let past wounds determine your future happiness. It frees not them, but you, to live rather than merely remember. So when I think of my father now, it's not with the sharp sting of betrayal, but with the complex understanding that we are all capable of both terrible mistakes and genuine growth. When I think of my grandfather, it's not with crippling grief, but with profound gratitude for the values he instilled and the legacy he entrusted to me. Memory Lake lives up to its name. It holds our past, the childhood summers, the family conflicts, the moments of loss and discovery, but more importantly, it contains our present and future, the lives touched by this place, the community restored, the natural beauty preserved. Not everyone gets the chance to fight for something that matters and win. Not everyone finds work that feels like purpose rather than obligation. Not everyone meets someone who believes in their dreams enough to help build them from the ground up. I got lucky on all three counts. Or maybe luck had nothing to do with it. Maybe it was simply about recognizing what matters and having the courage to risk everything for it. Either way, sitting here now with the lake spread before me like a mirror reflecting both sky and possibility, I can only feel grateful for the hard choices, for the unexpected allies, for the courage to jump when jumping seemed crazy. If you're reading this and feeling stuck in a life that doesn't fit, take it from someone who once wore a tie to a job he hated. The leap is terrifying, but the landing might just be worth it. Your memory lake is out there. The only question is whether you're brave enough to find it. As for me, I'll be here, helping kids catch their first fish, teaching guests to identify constellations, and sitting beside Emily on the dock as twilight turns the water to silver, grateful for every decision, good and bad, that led me home.